Availability. Tyler, what do you think about availability?
So availability is a really interesting topic. So I think what we want to talk about today is rarity. That seems to be kind of on people's minds. So how do we determine if a card is rare and therefore worth buying? What do you think beginners should do?
Well, I posted a series of stories a couple of weeks ago, which we're going to share today and talk a little bit more in depth about. And it's exactly what you mentioned. It's often thinking about which cards are the most rare, the most in demand. And for me, I really look at the availability of a card as a really important measure for how valuable it is or how it might be in the future. Because when we look at rarity of a card, it's actually not that complicated. That is exactly how many of a card has been printed. And so that can simply be the print run of a card. Related to that is kind of the odds, the pack odds or the player odds of pulling that from a pack. So that's really the rarity and essentially the supply of the card. Then we kind of move over to the demand side. And in demand, you don't really, it's harder for us to capture exactly what the demand is. A lot of things go into that, whether it's the aesthetics, the rarity, like we mentioned, how iconic a card is, just how much you like the card, and how many people like the card is the demand. But what we can capture is kind of the scarcity of the card, and that is where we get into availability. Scarcity is when we're looking at the rarity of the card in relation to the demand. So if everybody wants a card and it's not very available, that's where a card is scarce, and that's really where we start to see values drive up. Is that something that you take into consideration when you're thinking of buying Michael Jordan cards?
Not as much as I should. I think that is a really high level kind of expert way to look at it. I think maybe level one of what there's new collectors and kind of weekend collectors that probably don't consider supply and demand or availability or rarity at all, which is perfectly fine. Go buy what you like if you can find it, great. Maybe the next level up would be people who look at like pack odds or player odds. Oh, this one is 1 in 2,000 packs. This one is 1 in 500 packs. The problem with that is that the number of packs made is not uniform. So maybe like a 92 beam team, I'm going to make these numbers up, but maybe it's like 1 in 1,000 packs, but another like 97 Metal Universe is like 1 in 800 packs or something. The 800 packs doesn't necessarily mean it's rare because there might just be a lot fewer packs made of that one. So then the next level up from that would be print run. Very few people try to estimate this. It's not published by the manufacturers. It's only an estimate. It's pretty hard to find, but it can be very valuable. And then we get into what you've identified here, which is availability. There might be 300 cards of something that sells semi-frequently. Maybe it sells 5, 10, 20 times a year. There might be 2,000 cards of something that hardly ever sells. You never see it. So that's really what's important. How can I buy this right now? How long am I going to have to wait if I don't buy it right now? So it's not something it is something I kind of anecdotally kind of know if I'm looking for a card and I'm like, man, I haven't seen that card in 6 months. I'll factor that in, but I probably don't factor it in as much as I should. How about you? Do you think about it?
Not as much as I should, and that's kind of why I analyze some of the data in card ladder sales to try to figure out some numbers. And it's hard to get the exact numbers. I'm not like a data analyst by trade, and so I don't have everything in a spreadsheet that can be updated on a constant basis. But what I did was look at how many sales there were for very popular cards, popular Michael Jordan inserts over a certain period of time. So I did a 1 year time period and I divided it by the print run. So kept things as simple as I could. There are definitely a lot of caveats there. One is that when we look at sales, you'll see the exact same card sell multiple times. There can be the same cert number. There can be the exact same card that will sell more than one time in the course of the year. So there's
I
definitely.
think that's okay. I think that if I'm trying to buy that card, I don't really care that it sold 2 months ago. Like it's available now. So I think that's fine.
The other things that you can look at is the pop count, graded populations, which people love to point to. And there are so many factors when it comes to population counts because not every card is graded as often as any other given card. And so there may be a very low pop count for a card simply because it's not in demand in a grade. So I don't know, a base 1993 Michael Jordan Upper Deck card might have a low pop count, but maybe it's just not a card that's typically graded. And then when you look at the pop counts of a 10 or a 9 or certain grades, that depends on kind of how hard it is to get a specific grade. So not getting into the pop counts, availability, rarity, that's I think a totally different topic. The other thing that I think is really important is that rarity, a super rare card, does not necessarily mean that it's more valuable, because there are two sides of that coin. There's the supply and the demand. Just because you have a very rare card doesn't mean that there's demand or enough demand to drive the price of that card up.
Yeah, I think a good example of that may be the one that's behind you, the Ticket2.net, which has a serial number of 1,000, which isn't the lowest. It's semi-rare, but it's extremely popular. It's much more popular sometimes than some that have a lower print run.
Well, if you go to the other side here, we have a Warp Zone, which I think is a very low print run. I don't know, under 1,000 print run.
1,000.
Yeah.
I think.
And the price of value of that card is definitely lower than probably it should be based on that print run, just because it's not quite as in demand. It's a later year Upper Deck insert that's not as widely known.
And where do you find the print runs?
So I personally go to one of my favorite Instagram pages, Card Channel. So I'll give him a shout out. He actually has a new website that's up. I haven't tried it out yet, but I think that it has quite a bit of print runs that have been calculated based on publicly available data and estimates on how many packs and boxes that were actually produced. Okay, well, let's go ahead here and take a look. I'm not going to go into super detail, but I have a few slides for reference. The big takeaway when I ran this data last year, which was right at the midpoint at the end of June, was that we had about a 5% availability. So that's number of sales divided by the print run. I made some adjustments this year to make sure I had this equal data looking from last year to this year. So about 5.5% actually, after I adjusted everything. I added in some raw sales that I had previously excluded.
So of all the cards that exist of a particular card, let's say 93 Scoring Kings, of all the ones that were printed, about 5% went up for sale publicly in a year.
Exactly. Public sales, tracked in Card Ladder, so that doesn't count things at a card show, doesn't count anything sold on Facebook or Instagram, but just overall, just looking at kind of these, a directional number we can compare cards against.
Yeah.
This year, when I did the same kind of methodology at the end of June, similar to last year, we were at about 5.5%. So I was a little bit surprised that average availability was about 5.5%. That's over about 25 inserts that I pulled the print runs for that were under 1,000. And so I think I mentioned before, I looked at popular inserts. This was actually also including some less popular inserts. Does that surprise you, the 5% number?
Honestly, I didn't have any context for it before. Does it surprise me that it's consistent year to year? A little. I'm trying to think if I would think the number would rise as prices go up as they have the last year. I would think the percentage would go up, though that's just my intuition. Maybe as some people, it's like, wow, that card is this price now. I think I'll cash out, make that available, and buy something else or do something else with the money. The more prices go up, and as we've seen, they've doubled, tripled in the last year or two, the more non-card things I can use that money for. So if a card goes from $10 to $20, it's still $20. I can't do a lot in the real world. But if a card goes from $1,000 to $2,000, maybe I can fix that thing in my house or put it toward a car or something like that. So I think as the money gets real, and a lot of these inserts that were in the hundreds are now in the thousands, I would assume people are looking like, hey, that's some money I could do something with, and I think I'll sell and cash out. But apparently that's not correct.
You must have looked at the answer sheet, because actually that is pretty correct for the most popular cards. Something like Scoring Kings. In 2025, it sold 737 times. I think the print run is about 10,000. That's the estimate that we have. That's higher. 737 is higher than the previous year, 2024. There were 649 sales. In 2026, at the mid-year point, only halfway through the year, we're at 485 sales. So if we doubled by the end of the year, just kept the math simple, we would actually be at 970 sales. 9.7% of that print run would sell this year out of, compared to that base that I mentioned of the 5.5%. For the most popular cards, it's 9.7. So as the price of this is obviously skyrocketed, definitely we see people start to try to cash in.
And for an earlier insert like this that was always popular but wasn't always like the super case hit or like the real chase, I could see some of these being in kids' collections. Those kids are now in their 30s and 40s, and the packs were reasonably priced, maybe $1.50 in that era. And maybe new people are coming to the hobby every day. They could be discovering these cards and somehow be exposed to the fact that the Scoring Kings is now selling for thousands of dollars, and they think, oh, I might have that one, and they dig it up. Unlike maybe something like Lynchpins, where it's like I probably didn't have that because packs were like $3. I stopped collecting at that point. Those sorts of things. So I guess the higher percentage for this tracks.
I should actually correct myself. Thinking now about the data that I ran, I actually looked at the rarer inserts, and that's where I got the 5.5%. And when we get to these more popular inserts, that's where we see the availability rate increase. So probably should correct myself and go back and delete what I said. But let's look at two of the other most popular cards. Beam Team 1992. I don't actually have the print run on this. I know that Members Only is a 10,000 print run. That's from the full sets that were sold. And so I think that's lower than the pack pulled version. So let's assume 15,000, maybe it's 20,000. If it's 15,000, the availability is going to be 10% this year. So similar to the Scoring Kings, like we mentioned. And then Power and the Key, the other extremely popular early 90s insert, we're at 521 sales for the year out of versus 816 for the full year last year. So if we double it again this year, we'll be at a 13% availability out of the 7,800 print run. So these are, again, the most popular cards, the things that have skyrocketed the most, and they are definitely selling much more often than they did last year.
So it kind of begs the question, like these are not only are they not rare, they're not unavailable. So there's thousands of these cards. I can go on eBay. There's probably 3, 4, 5 listed right now. It just kind of adds to the astonishment of how much they've increased in a year or two. Scoring Kings to go from $750 probably 18 months ago, PSA 8, to now 6,000 plus. I mean, what is that, 8x in a year and a half for a card that is very readily available. Easily one a month, like if it's 10, but actually a lot more than that. I could find several right now. This Power and the Key to go from 200 in a PSA 8 to likely 1,500 in a PSA 8. I mean, these are 8xing over a year or two when there's no shortage of them available. How do we reconcile that?
It's definitely something to be cautious of, right? It doesn't mean that these are going to come crashing down. One thing that it can mean is that demand is sky high and that there are quite a few more newer Michael Jordan collectors out there, which I believe completely to be true. But I think at the same time, it does mean to be cautious. When you see increases that are going that high, there's bound to be some sort of correction. If it doesn't fall, all the way to where it was before, at some point we will see some leveling off. And I will give the caveat again that I'm often completely wrong about this. I've been saying that these cards should go down for a very long time, so maybe they go up forever.
I completely agree. Scoring Kings can't go past 1,600, and yet here it is at 6,000. So we don't know.
Okay, so once again, 10% for the less rare inserts, about 5.5% for the rare inserts. A couple of interesting things that I also brought up that I wanted to share here is that there are definitely some inserts you want to keep your eye on in terms of how often they have been selling so far this year. So similar to what we mentioned before, we have a couple of slightly rarer inserts, Soul of the Game and Net Assets here, which in the first half of the year of 2025, Soul of the Game sold 62 times. net assets sold 54 times. And so far this year, in the first half of the year, they're selling 50% more often. So 92 sales for soul of the game, 83 sales for net assets. So similar to what we talked about earlier, when the prices of some of these cards go up, all Michael Jordan cards going up, more of them come out of the woodwork and more go out for sale.
Yeah, and I think the advantage of being in the Facebook groups, which we primarily are, and that's where I do most of my buying and selling, you can kind of see, like I'm not on eBay. There's many people who are checking eBay every day and Fanatics every day, and that's great. And just being in a kind of in the space and in the market and on Facebook groups, you can see what's going for sale, and on eBay you can see what's coming up for sale, and you just sort of know in the back of your head which cards are available and which aren't. Like every single day I see a Scoring Kings, every day I see a Beam Team. There are certain cards where you're like, man, I just don't see that very often. Even 96 Scoring Kings, which you see way less often than 93. 96 Max Metal, like cards that aren't super rare, that I don't have the data in front of me, but I guess if we did this analysis, would be far less than the 10%, below 5% as we're seeing with this soul in the game and net assets. And that's also interesting. Just it's not necessarily, the rarer the card, the less availability it is. It's certain cards just are more available and certain cards are less. And it's really the supply that we're looking at, because we're not really measuring demand with the availability so much. It's how much is this card being posted for sale and I guess selling. So that does bring the demand a bit, but interesting there.
Two more to look at: Electrifying and Warp Speed, also extremely popular cards. I mentioned here I was waiting for Card Channel's website because I don't know the print runs on them, but just again to compare the number of sales in the first half of the year, Electrifying sold 89 times in the first half of 2026, only 58 in 2025, and then Warp Speed up from 199 to 301. The other thing that I saw when I looked at last year's data, I had pulled it at the mid-year point. When I pulled the second half of 2025, everything kind of went up. So there were more sales towards the end of the year of 2025, which I think tracks and makes sense because the spike in Michael Jordan cards started in about August of last year. So back half of the year, when prices started soaring, we started to see more of these come out of the
Yeah, I wonder if that's a year-by-year phenomenon, that always the second half is higher. I would have thought there'd be some leveling off with the holidays.
Same.
So some big card shows in the second half of the year. Even this month, we've got Fanatics Fest and the National. And the online selling, I think, takes a little bit of a backseat. A lot of people are saving their money for the National, or maybe saving their inventory. Prices usually start to dip in the November and December as people kind of settle in and travel. So I'm interested to see this year if it's the same, or is it more like a function of the market at that time?
So what do we do with all this information, right? We found that rarer inserts are selling 5% of their print runs in a year, 5.5%. The less rare, the most popular cards are selling 10% of their print runs in the year. Does that mean that we shouldn't buy any of the popular inserts? It doesn't necessarily mean that. It could mean a couple things, though, like I mentioned before. Maybe these cards that you see here will drop at some point, or maybe those less available, more rare cards that are at 5%, maybe those values will increase over time. Maybe the ones that are even below 5%, if only 3% of their print runs have sold in the past year, maybe the next sale is going to go way up. So just some things to take into consideration as we're thinking of the next Michael Jordan cards that you want to buy.
And I think the next question is for our audience: what type of collector are you? Are you a dealer who's just trying to get in and get out, and you're looking for liquid cards? Well, these are the cards that are going to be liquid. Maybe you're new to the Michael Jordan game and you want to you want to collect, you want to invest, you want to deal to fund your collection. If you're looking for some liquid cards, look at the availability rate, because there's going to be a lot of comps in every grade, and these are going to move easily. If you're looking to collect the hard to find ones, something that only comes up like 1, 2, 3% of the print run per year. When you're looking at prices, know that you might have to wait 3, 6, 9 months for the next sale. If you're selling one of those cards, you can kind of set more of the the price for it. If I want to sell a Beam Team or a Scoring Kings, I'm pretty much at the mercy of comps because there was probably one yesterday in whatever grade that I have. And I can't really charge 10, 20% of the market because somebody will just buy someone somewhere else. But if I want to sell cards that only come up every 6 months, I can be a little bit patient, find that right collector who really wants this card and doesn't want to wait 6 months. And we're talking Jordan, and he's retired, but if you collect other players that are still playing, what's going to happen in 6 months? Is their market going to be different? Are they going to win the championship? Are they going to retire? Are they going to get hurt, etc.?
Well, that's why we don't collect other players. We stick with the goats. Michael Jordan it is.